I'm Julie from Bontà Gelato in Bend, and it's my honor today to be teaching you a little bit about frozen dessert. So both of our desserts that we're going to be making today are inspired by the desert, so two different flavors. The first is going to be a Juniper Berry gelato. It's inspired obviously by our high desert here in Central Oregon. And the other is going to be a lemon and honey sorbetto. So a water-based dessert inspired by dry climate. I don't know about you, but when I'm out in a dry climate, a little bit of lemon and honey seems to do the trick. So the intention would be, my intention was, is that these two could very easily be served together to kind of complement and offset each other. So we'll start with the Juniper Berry gelato. So I'm going to be starting with about a quart, about 1,000 grams of our white base. It's just a very neutral base. There's no eggs in it. It being gelato is a lower fat product. My suggestion for homemakers or home ice cream makers is to find a kind of base recipe that works really good with your machine. Most manufacturers will have one that comes with it, but you know, there's lots of other options out there. The big part of what we're trying to do is control the water. So milk has a lot of water. Gelato is a lower fat product, so we add some dry milk powder to ours to kind of boost that what's called a solid count. So kind of, I don't know, the best way to explain it is just kind of managing that water in such a way. So water, when it freezes, obviously wants to find other water. And if it's not kind of bound up and taken care of in that process, will start to create crystals, especially in a home machine, a home ice cream maker, because that freeze process is not happening super fast. So my best suggestion would be to kind of boost that solid count. I've seen some kind of home recipes that include milk powders like we use, or even cream cheese is a great option as well. So like I said, I'm going to be starting with our kind of neutral white base, and then I picked up some dried juniper berries from Savory Spice down in the old mill. So we're going to infuse that flavor of the juniper berries into our white base. So a couple of different approaches that you can take to an infusion like that. One that we use is to make an extract. So we will take, intense flavors, and we will soak them with, like our lavender, soak those with an alcohol for about a month, and then strain that out. So that's really just a time where you don't want the lavender buds in the gelato itself. You don't want to be biting into that. Same with the juniper berries. We're not going to want to bite into a whole juniper berry. It's going to be too intense. So we just want to infuse that. So yeah, making an extract or just a straight infusion, which is what we're going to do today. So I have about a tablespoon of juniper berries, and I counted them because that's what I do. It's about 40. So the approach that I took to this, and I did kind of prep it beforehand, is just to crush it. If you have a mortar and pestle, that's a great approach too. I just don't happen to have one at home. So I just took the flat blade of my knife and just kind of crunched them. And they are firm, they want to roll around, but just getting that kind of initial crush on that. Here's kind of what we're going for. You can leave it at that and just put that straight directly in. What I did is I first did a crush, added them to my white base, and then I just ran a quick little stick blender through that. From there, I let it soak in the fridge, obviously with the milk, and shake it every so often. The big part about what we're trying to do has to do with time and surface area. So if you have a lot of time, feel free to just leave them like this. They're a little easier to strain out actually. But then the time that you're going to want to let it set is going to be longer. You're going to probably want to let it set overnight. I suggest just tasting it sporadically throughout the process. and then strain it when it feels right to you. Everyone has a different palate. Depending on what you're serving it with, you may want a little more or less intensity. So from there, this is kind of where we ended up with that sitting. I'm not a very patient person, so that's why I did the little stick blender, and the whole process goes just a little bit faster. So I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of, it almost looks like blueberries, to be honest, and it's very fragrant. So from that, we're just gonna strain those juniper berries out. And again, if you run a little blender, or the little stick blender over it, and your mesh sieve does not catch all of it, it's a great opportunity to just run it through a little cheesecloth. But I usually find that I get most of the toothiness of those berries out. You'll get a few flecks here and there, but the intensity of those is going to be a lot less. So just straining that through. If I had a little bit bigger strainer, that would go a little faster. And then from that point, you can run it through your home machine. So for us today, we're going to prep everything, and then we're going to pop over to the kitchen so that I can just show you the process of running on a commercial machine. So we'll leave that to go. And this is a nice mesh strainer. It's pretty fine, which I like. So I really don't want a lot of that chunk coming through. So at that point, it kind of just looks like a vanilla. Let's see if I can balance that carefully or not. I know it'll stay. There we go. I'll set that off to the side. So like I said, from that, you could go ahead and just run that product through your home machine. If your machine doesn't have a timer on it or a sensor, just really watch for texture. You don't want to over-process a gelato. You'll notice it much more in a water-based product, but you don't want it to start crumbling or kind of breaking apart. So that means it's been over-processed or over-frozen, and it will affect the texture kind of long-term. So that's our juniper berry. So for a water-based frozen dessert, it becomes even more so about water management. So in this one, what we're going to do is we are going to use a little bit of stabilizer. We use an all natural. It's a guar gum and a locust bean gum. You can very easily use some of your kind of high power starches. I've seen recipes for using cornstarch, tapioca starch, xanthan gum, and a lot of times those in combination will give you a better effect than just one of them on their own. So. But what we want to do is bind up that water a little bit. So especially with a lemon, the intensity of the lemon is high enough that we're not going to get really any body from the fruit itself. We're really only going to use about 20% of our recipe as the lemon. So very different than if you're using a berry where you're going to use maybe 50 or 60% and you're going to get some fiber and body out of that fruit itself. So water management becomes much more important with a high intensity fruit on water. So what we're going to do there, I would really suggest a kitchen scale for measuring if you're not using one already for baking, but it's great for these as well. It just allows you to kind of add to. So I am also going to be using a little bit of tapioca dextrose. So just the sugars that are processed from tapioca versus the starches as sucrose as opposed to a dextrose. It's just a different chained sugar. So it's going to help us with that, keeping the product a little bit softer without getting too sweet, as well as preventing the sugar from wanting to recrystallize. So sugar and water both want to recrystallize. They want to find their friends. So we want to try and prevent that from happening because we want a smooth product. So a little bit of dextrose. You really don't want more than about 20% of your total sugar I would say about 20% each of your total sugars to be taken up with alternate sugars, either honey, dextrose, those. White sugar is our just kind of baseline standard, and that's 2-part when you're working with a frozen dessert. So in one sense, we're going for the amount of sweetness, but sugars are really our antifreeze as well. So too much and your product will just be kind of sloppy, too little and it'll be kind of hard and more like ice cubey. So kind of getting that right. We're usually shooting for about anywhere from say 27 to 30% total sugar. A good way to be able to check that at home is with just a basic refractometer. You can buy one on Amazon, and it's just testing your liquid for the amount of sugar in it. So we do that with our fruit before we add it. So we want to know what we're adding. It's great if you make jams as well, so you kind of know, fruit changes throughout the season, and so just kind of knowing what you're working with all the time gives you the numbers to be able to work off of. So I added that dextrose. To that, I'm going to add a small amount of our commercial stabilizer, like I said. So if you're working at home, I would kind of play around with it a little bit. Too much, and your product's going to get kind of gummy. The mouthfeel is not going to be super great. So again, you kind of want to keep that at a minimum to kind of do the job of managing the water without going too far. So I like to cut those together. I'm going to also cut the sugar in with that because the stabilizer has a really high water absorbency. I don't want it to kind of bind up. If you've ever worked with tapioca starch, it just kind of wants to ball up, and once it's kind of balled up, it's hard to kind of get back. So to that, I'm going to add our sugar. And I obviously pre-measured those, but you could very easily just measure, zero out your scale, add to it. So it makes using that scale really, really nice. So to that, I'm going to add our honey. So it's kind of got a little bit thick. I had warmed it up. And I need to turn on. So I'm going to add about 40 grams of honey. Like I said, I'm going to take just a portion of our sugar and switch that over. So like I said, our sugar, white sugar is kind of our baseline for anti-freezing. The dextrose has a lower perception of sweetness and a higher antifreeze, which is why I like adding a little bit of dextrose. It allows the sweetness to stay a little bit lower with getting a little more softness out of the product. Honey is just takes a step up on both counts. So it has more antifreeze properties to it. It also does have a little higher sweetness perception as well than sugar, just straight sugar does. So when you're swapping it out in a frozen dessert recipe, just keep that in mind. You're going to want to take whatever amount of sugar you're replacing and take that down by about 20% if you're going to replace that with honey. So, all right, so we have that. To that, I'm going to add the lemon juice. This is just a pure lemon juice that we get. You can obviously juice it yourself. You can also add a little zest and then strain it out. It's a nice effect. And let's see. All right. From there, I like to give it a blend. I find just being able to get it kind of thick before I add all that water keeps the stabilizer from wanting to bind up. So we're going to go ahead and just blend that. Obviously, I use a bigger stick blender than this one. I'm working in the creamery, but this is my home version. smoothie making blender. I just like a stick blender. I feel like it gives me a little more control and kind of finding lumps and kind of tracking them down. So to that, we're gonna add our water. And I like to add hot water. I like to add hot water to the solution. It helps break down the sugar. It helps the starches or stabilizer to kind of bloom and hydrate. And then I like to let it sit overnight so that process can go even further. I find the texture is a little better when those starches or stabilizers have a little bit of chance to kind of absorb before you freeze them. So just blend it up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this out. Top off with the rest of that water I'd added. Probably cut that a little close. And let that sit overnight. Before you freeze that, I would suggest blending it again. Probably should have used a bigger container or scaled it down just a little bit to be able to blend again. You want your product to be uniform before you freeze it. You can't really trust that freezing process to make everything uniform again. So, that will go in the fridge overnight, and then we'll freeze it. So let's pop over to the commercial kitchen and do a little freezing. Okay, here we are at our creamery location on Wilson, and we're gonna head on inside and get ready to freeze. We're ready to freeze. So what we have here are batch freezers. So it's called a batch freezer because you're gonna pour an individual batch in, it's gonna freeze it, you're gonna take that whole batch out. So I'll show you the inside of this one. It just has paddles. So as those churn, they scrape the sides, keep churning, freezing, freezing. So that's how that works. So we're going to go ahead and pour in our lemon. Obviously, if your product is sat for any amount of time, you're going to want to re-blend it just to make sure it's homogenized. As uniform as possible. And we want to use all of it. Alright. So everything is in on the hopper, and then we just tell it to freeze. So our batch freezers have different settings based on what we're freezing. So with sorbetto, we're going to want to freeze a little less long so that it doesn't overprocess and get crumbly. If you're using an at-home machine, you're just going to want to watch your product, make sure it's not starting to kind of get a crumbly texture, especially with the water-based sorbetto. So, and then we wait. So as it freezes, it's going to light up, and we'll beep at us when it's ready. It has temperature sensors in there, so at that point, we're going to tell it to have the gelato or sorbetto come out. So you can see it's nice and smooth and creamy. And we're back. So thank you guys for going on this little tour of desert desserts with me. I hope you learned a few things, got a few tips on making your frozen desserts at home, and just kind of wanted to give you a little glimpse of the end product. So we have our honey and lemon sorbetto and our Juniper Berry Gelato. So enjoy, and hope to see you around our high desert.